Sarasota School of Architecture. I'll listen and learn.
From the Comcast Cable Television Studios in Sarasota, this is Sarasota Today, an in-depth forum highlighting today's issues, current events, and people that affect our lifestyle in Sarasota County. For Sarasota Arts Today, here's your host, Patricia Caswell.
Hi, I'm Patricia Caswell from the Arts Council. I'm in my day job as Executive Director of the Arts Council, but as such, I get the privilege and the honor of talking to some of the most fascinating people in culture and the arts in Sarasota. And today I certainly have two of the most fascinating. Carl Abbott, architect, Tim Seibert, architect, and they recently talked at a Smart Talk. The Arts Council has a series of lectures about all forms of art, and everybody who left that, maybe 300 or 400 people who left that talk, said this was the most fascinating thing that they had heard in a long time. So I thought it would be worth having you both back to share with a broader audience what you talked to our Arts Council members about recently. So let's start with just a self-introduction. You two have a lot in common. So if you tell me the things that you have in common, then we'll begin to learn more about both of you. Tim.
Well, we are both great men.
I know that.
Yes. But aside from that, we are both fellows of the American Institute of Architects. We have similar awards for design, the State Award for Design, the Test of Time Award, which both Carl and I got this year. I got the 25-year one, and he got the 10, but that's because I'm the older, and I guess I've been here longer. Carl, what else do we have?
Well, we're both distinguished alumni of the University of Florida.
That's right.
Exactly.
And then you go to Stanford?
I went to Stanford early in life, where I am a World War II veteran, and I ended up in San Francisco and went to Stanford for 3 years as an art major.
I learned something.
And I discovered that architecture was something I really wanted to do. Mm-hmm. So then I went down to the University of Florida. I read their catalog, which was quite interesting, and put all my possessions in a battered Chevrolet and emigrated to the University of Florida.
And while we're throwing out dropping names of great colleges, didn't you teach at Harvard or something?
Yes,
like that?
just recently.
Recently.
Right.
So, I mean, we're talking some real credentials here.
I couldn't get into Stanford today, I'm sure.
Today? Oh, I bet you
sure.
could. I bet they'd want you to come and teach. Okay, so tell us, Tim, let's start with you, what you shared with our audience at Smart Talk about the Sarasota School of Architecture.
Well, the Sarasota School of Architecture was actually named in 1982 at an AIA meeting in Tampa. But the actual work started out back in the late 40s after World War II. I worked off and on for Paul Rudolph, who I believe, and I think, in fact, I guess it is acknowledged today, probably the most important architect of this century, I think. Carl, why don't you give a few words on...
Rudolph is clearly considered that. He was teaching at Yale in the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s. And just to jump in quickly, my background, to throw it in, because ours do overlap here, is I was in Fort Myers High School, then I went to University of Florida, then I came to Sarasota when Tim was very much in full swing with his office, and then I went directly to Yale for my master's under Paul Rudolph. So that's my connection.
Okay, yeah.
Rudolph, as Tim is saying, is not just Florida, not just Sarasota, not just Florida, not just the South. He's international. He's one of the most important architectural teachers and practitioners of this millennium.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew him in the start of things when he was doing very small houses, sort of one at a time. And one of his clients was Phil Hiss, who was at the time developing houses out on Lido Shores. And Paul did several houses out there. But it was interesting as a young man to live in that milieu of seeing people like Philip Johnson come to visit him, Henry Russell Hitchcock, Chick Austin from the Ringling Museum used to come by the office, Talbot Hamlin, the historian. while people like me were not allowed to speak, we could listen.
Because you were
And,
kind of young at the time?
yeah, I was once I was young,
Yeah.
and it was an extraordinarily interesting time. In a sense, perhaps it was rather harmful because I thought the world was that way everywhere, and it turned out I was wrong.
You mean so highly intellectual?
Intellectual and really fine for a young architect. And then in my early life, Paul used to occasionally give me very tough critiques, which I remember with great joy today, and some of the rules that he propounded for lesser talents. He would say, there are 5 ways that you may put these forms together, but I will now do it the 6th because I'm better than you. And I believed him, and I always have. So those were wonderful days. And then I opened my own office in 1955. And the clients were quite good here. There were people of intellect and some wealth who also were not aloof from the problems and interests of the town. And one of my early clients was a man named Frank Fine, who had been to Sorbonne and Grenoble studying philosophy, and he decided to become a merchant builder. So I brought along a couple of photographs of some of the things that we were doing then.
Please show. Here, I will
This
hold it
was
while you
a speculative house, which we sold for $18,000 on your lot, and then we did a number of variances on that.
Are these houses on Lido?
They're all over, as a matter of fact. The first
Another one?
little house I just showed you was widely published. It was in Better Homes and Gardens, 5-star. It won the AI Award of Merit, and one of the magazines sent me, I think it was $3,000 for using the plans, and the curse of that was that everywhere you drove in Florida, you got to see it painted the wrong color. But these were, they were very small, and they were built of ordinary materials, and that was sort of the way things were. This is my own house that I built in 1952. And I lived there for many years. I built that with my own hands for $12,000. And you really couldn't, you would not be allowed to build that house today. There are too many regulations.
That's true.
But it served me very well.
And the philosophy, briefly tell me the philosophy of the Sarasota School of Architecture.
Well, I think that it had to do, first of all, with space and shape and form. And a great deal of it had to do, we weren't air conditioning things then, so you had to what we then called cross ventilation, which is now known as passive air conditioning. Everything has a new name. Since that time, a great many laws and regulations have really prohibited that kind of work.
Wasn't part of it to bring the outside in?
Well, visual extension was the idea that the walls sort of slipped into the outdoors. And in my old house, you could never tell whether you were indoors or out because there was no air conditioning anyway. And there are very few of those that haven't been badly altered because most people want air conditioning today.
Absolutely.
But we used ordinary materials, 2-inch lumber and concrete block and stucco. And
I thought that some guys experimented at that time with odd materials, brand new things. Some worked and some didn't for roofs.
Well, yeah, there was a good deal. Paul started the plywood vaults, and I was the tester, being the fattest kid in the office.
You had to
we used to build a mock-up, and I would go out and jump on it to see what it would do.
We have to break for a commercial now, but we will be back with more of Sarasota School of Architecture.
You're viewing Sarasota Today.
And we're back with some fellows from the Sarasota School of Architecture, and we've talked to Tim Seibert and now Carl Abbott. Tell us briefly what you talked about at Smart Talk, and
Sure.
go on from there.
Very quickly, let me just say I've already said a bit about my background here. University of Florida, then I studied at Yale under Paul Rudolph, who's really the head of the Sarasota School of Architecture. There are many other people, important ones such as Ralph Twitchell, very, very important man, and somebody who we certainly should not ignore. Very, very important guy.
And Victor Lundy.
And Victor Lundy, of course. There are a lot of people, and the Zimmermans and others. I came to Sarasota right in the early 60s, which was towards not the end of what was dubbed the Sarasota School, but it was near the end of that. I had worked in Hawaii between that, after graduating at Yale, and I had worked in London. So I had had some very diverse experiences and interrelationships with architecture, whatever. When I came back to Sarasota, it was a very different place than it had been to me when I had been here. When I first came, right after, in the late 50s, there were a lot of changes, and I saw things very differently because I had had a lot of other experiences. One of the things you were asking me to share here, too, was my comment about the Sarasota School of Architecture and how it relates really to some of the other major movements in architecture in the world. International style, or the Bauhaus, that was really carried through in the Bauhaus in Germany, was a school in which the architect diagrammatically would place a building above the earth and let the earth roll by. It was the concept of the philosophy that all building materials are machine-made. So you conceptually show them as separate from the earth. Whereas the other school, which is the predominant one, was the predominant one in this country before the World War, was the organic school of Frank Lloyd Wright's, and that's a school that says that everything originates from the earth, even though it goes through a mechanical industrial process. Let's express how it relates to the earth in its form. So there's the two opposite schools, one that's tied to the earth, one that's floating above the earth. And they both respect the earth and nature and open to views. Both clearly would do that. But Sarasota, what Paul Rudolph and Zimmerman and some of these guys were doing here, and Lundy, was really a melding of those two very important schools. And the only other place that this happened in any really coherent way was in LA. And so we have something very, very unique here in Sarasota that most people don't think of or don't realize what a legacy we've got here.
Now, there is a book by John Howie
Right.
that anybody can buy in the local bookstores about the Sarasota School.
Barnes & Noble still has it. They keep selling out.
In fact, someone said they saw it in Barnes & Noble in New York, and they were very impressed.
Well,
yeah.
when I was in London a couple of years ago, some friends said they saw one of my houses on a book in Barcelona, and the other said, well, I just saw it in Japan.
Wow.
So the book is all around the
all
world.
around.
Yeah.
It's an MIT press, so it's very definitely an important publisher. And the book's, I guess, in the second or third edition right now, running.
Great.
It's a very scholarly and careful job.
And the other thing that I didn't say the other day, and I really meant to say it, so I'm glad we can say it right now. There are other books being done right now on this work. One is done by a very talented architect in Bradenton, a guy named Joe King. And Joe and an architect from New York, a young guy, have gotten a contract with Rizzoli to do a book on early Paul Rudolph houses. So that's in the works. And Rizzoli, as you know, is one of the big art and architecture book companies in the world. And there are other books being done on the work that was done in Sarasota and Florida, specifically Rudolph's work. But it ties into the whole school, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, Philip Hiss was the school super, no,
He
the school
was the
chairman.
chairman of the school
Right.
board.
Yeah.
And
So he had an effect. I've always been fascinated by the fact that one man, such an intellectual man, had an effect on the architecture.
he
of many
was
schools.
also the reason that New College happened.
Exactly.
Too.
Right.
Exactly.
And that was deliberate. He and a number of other leaders in the community saw that Sarasota was failing as an intellectual community, and they thought maybe a great college would help to stop the failing.
Now, so the architecture of which schools would people recognize?
Well, Sarasota High is one of Paul's schools, which at that time, Time magazine said there was more going on architecturally in Sarasota than anywhere else in America.
That's amazing. I'd love to have a copy.
Yeah, it had the strongest school building program in America.
And I might add that at one point in my career, when I was doing a land plan for that tract and Alta Vista, that one of my assignments was to talk the school board members out of chopping off the sunshades. And, you know, that and Riverview, which has this atrocious pitched roof that they put on, this janitor's mentality to keep it from leaking. By golly, that'll never leak. When
Right.
They put this pitched roof
But
on it,
they
they took
ruined it.
off the sunscreens and they made it into something very ordinary.
Yeah.
Now, it seems a great shame to me that we don't have children going to school in wonderful buildings, which show that why do we try to save Ringling Towers? We can't save these school buildings.
Yeah,
As a matter of fact, we save a lot of really bum architecture around here because it's over 50. We don't do anything for the stuff that's younger.
Yeah, let me comment on that too. Is Riverview High School that we're both talking about here, like a 35, 40-year-old school. Yes, buildings take maintenance. All buildings take maintenance, just like we all take maintenance. But certainly the school had maintenance concerns. But when they did this roof that totally destroys the integrity of the architecture, it's quite amazing to me that that could happen. But what I want to be positive about is that by our talking here today about what our legacy is in Sarasota and what it can be, is that we'll become more aware of what we have, and that we will, when the building needs care again, it can be restored properly, not aborted further. And the buildings that are here can be hopefully put back in shape, and those that are here in a good shape will be protected. So we have a legacy.
It's time for intellectual people to take the future of Sarasota's planning and the keeping of its buildings out of the hands of bureaucrats. Now, they don't understand what it's about.
Or maybe we need more of a melding of the two.
Well, I think it's a community awareness,
I think they need
too.
to be told what to do.
Right, and I think this can be done through a community awareness. And I mentioned the other day that the Sarasota Arts Association, if I said that right?
I think it's the Sarasota Fine Arts
Yes,
Society.
yes, is planning to do a tour in about a year and a half from now. It'll be a week-long tour of some of the Sarasota School of Architecture buildings. And this would be public buildings, private buildings, and they're hoping that this would be an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
So it'll become really a festival of Sarasota celebrating and hopefully restoring and honoring its legacy and adding to it.
Yeah, I would.
Well, there are a lot of them we can bring back, and
Yes.
people begin to realize it and
Yes.
scrape some of the junk off of them and clean them up a little
Right.
bit. We'd have something quite wonderful historically.
Right.
Indeed.
And it would mean a lot. I mean, you could say it means a lot to us locally. It means a lot to a lot of people in a lot of areas, and economically, it could be very viable for the community.
Yes, if people would be proud of their heritage.
Exactly.
They would want to, but they don't even know about it, maybe.
And most people don't know, and they don't realize it's important, and it is important. And I want to just add this too, and I said this the other day, is one of my close friends from Yale is a very, very important architect in the world today, and doing some of the most important buildings, Hong Kong Airport and New Tower in London, and he did the Ragstad. His comments about Paul Rudolph as an instructor, as an architect, are amazing. Paul Rudolph really made him see architecture in another way. And this is a man who's redoing the British Museum. I mean, this is from Sarasota, these influences. And they're happening all over. And I said the other day also,
We all should know and be proud of that.
we should be proud of this.
And beyond that, buildings are symbols of the culture.
Exactly.
And at one point, they had Sarasota High School in a Chamber of Commerce booklet, and underneath it said, Sarasota has a great education system. And this was the symbol of it. Well, we don't seem to have very many symbols right now.
We need to take another break, and we will be back with a couple more photos and some conclusions about maybe what we can do about it.
This is Sarasota Today.
I want to show two more pictures in a minute here, whenever our camera can be ready, and then I want to ask you, while the pictures are on, first maybe you can tell us about these, and I want to ask you why we don't still have something like this, why it hasn't been continued, or if it has been continued in any way, or how we could continue it. Now this is John B. McDonald.
That's John McDonald's house, which was published around the world, in Japan and Germany, and won various awards. And
Like living
John,
outside.
most of all, I think it made John very happy.
Yes.
And it was a wonderful time for me. The builder and I enjoyed building it. John was a brilliant kind of a guy that you could explain things to. Almost a perfect client.
You know, one of the points you made, I think, Carl, you made, was clients. one of the reasons why this
Yeah.
happened was because
Yeah, you've got to have aware clients, and there've been, and there still are some very aware clients here, and they
That-
know what a building can do for you.
That was a little house I did for a friend of my father's in 1961, which again was widely heralded by the press. It was in Life magazine,
Life magazine.
one of the things.
Wow.
And we built that for $26,000. So, you know, the good architecture isn't, I mean, I understand today that would probably be $260,000 or something, but in the dollars of its time, it wasn't an expensive house. You don't have to spend a lot of money. What architects are looking for are good, pleasant, intelligent clients. They don't even have to know much about architecture. They just have to be able to pick up on things. Our civic problem is that the governments here don't seem to be able to figure out what architecture is about. They are
You're
not
talking about
good
for public buildings.
public buildings. They are not good clients, and that's why things come out amiss.
What
so
would make our
often.
governments better clients?
Well, it would help if they knew something about architecture, or at least
But you
got
said
some.
the client doesn't need to know about architecture.
That is true,
So
but
how
that's when
could-
you start. But as you get into it, you teach them about it. Didactic is what I am, and I have always been with clients. But they don't want to hear you. They don't want to know.
How about the idea of architectural reviews? What is your opinion on that? Both of you would just join right in, Carl.
Yeah, I think, as we said earlier, I think an architectural design review board is what we're talking about. Before you build something, it has to go through a committee to be reviewed. I think that's disaster.
Absolute disaster.
And it's really
Ridiculous.
making everything so uniform that there is no sense of individuality and no
How do you
character.
stop these big
How do you,
houses?
well, I think
No,
Tim
no.
said it, and he's been in the paper quoted what he said, you get good architects.
Get
I mean,
good
that's really the
architects. It's
answer.
very easy. Get
People
good
who are
architects,
trained.
talk to them and learn. You have to learn, and people don't seem to want to learn, but that's, architects teach you things.
So our public bodies could...
Well, let me jump back to the other thing that you both were saying there, is, it's how do we select the best architects and get the best building for our public buildings?
which I think Sarasota deserves the best.
Oh, it does deserve the best. I mean, it's really, for those of us who've been here a long time, and Tim and I both have, it's heartbreaking to see some of the things that are built here. It's heartbreaking. And let me just tell you some of the how some of the public buildings are selected, who's on the selection committee. These are the people who will review the proposals. And when architects go after a project, it's called an RFP. And what an architect is to do is to send in his book, which is usually pretty thick, of what he's done that relates, or his credentials, his awards, his background, his staff, all with the rest. And that's then weeded out by a group, and then you're interviewed. 4 or 5 different firms are interviewed. Okay, so it's a limiting process, and the people the committees who had the position, let me say, that had a vote on the county library, the recent one downtown, is the deputy county administrator. He had 1 vote. Another is the manager of the physical plant. He's the guy in charge of new construction. Again, let me just go through this group. The next is a guy of procurement. The next is the budget department head, and then the head librarian. That's it. Those 5 people are the ones who voted on the person.
So how could you get an architectural mind in there?
There's not an architectural mind in there.
How could you? I mean,
there isn't.
Are you advocating that there should be one?
There
at least
should be,
somebody,
I'm
an
convinced there
advisor
should
on
be, and this is done in a number of different places. There is a paid expert who helps the committee understand what's being presented and interpret it. I don't want to say understand, but help clarify to the architect being interviewed and to the client what the discussion is about. And this hired hand, as you want to call him, a hired assistant professional, ideally is out of area.
Right.
He's someone who looks at the best for your community. He also follows the project through all the phases until it's under construction. Because what often happens also, once the architect's been selected, who then reviews the different stages of the design review? Well, in most cases, it's one guy, and that's the head of the physical plant. That's the guy who's in charge of construction.
The janitorial mind at work.
Yes.
We have only one more minute. Do you have one last little piece of wisdom, Tim, for us?
Get better architects, learn about architecture. Sarasota, like the rest of Florida, by 2038 will have twice as many people as it has today. We have no plan. Our 50-year plan failed because that wonderful firm they picked went bankrupt and skipped out of town, I guess, is the way I get it. It never happened.
You got to go bye-bye. I don't even have time for a word of wisdom from Carl, but we'll bring you back, Carl.
Okay. Good.
Thank you.